Hi, Simone. Nice to have you on the Women for Impact podcast. So, just to give the viewers an idea, me and Simone have worked together virtually. So, usually, I always start with how we met and if whether we work together or not. We've worked together. I think the last time was about 2 years ago or so. The moment I heard about Simone and what she does, I immediately got a copy of her first book, which I think was published in 2012, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's been a
So,
while now.
yeah, it's been a while, but it's still relevant, I think. So, anyway, I love the topic, and I think it was an opportunity as well to have you here on this podcast or on this platform to talk about your experience and get to know about your work a little bit more. So how about we start from there? If you can give us an introduction about yourself, please.
Sure. I'm Simone Ahuja, and thank you, Sahar. It's so nice to see you again and just exchange ideas after a while and all the things that we've
Yeah.
been through and all the kind of the early days of when people were thinking about technology and what does it mean in large organizations. So I'm an innovation strategist, I'm an author, and these days mostly a keynote speaker. So I'm speaking all around the world about innovation, entrepreneurship. What does it mean? How do we do it? What are the applications of certain technologies? And that's been a lot of fun for sure. I've got a third book on the way. And I'll just reveal this, that it is going to be certainly connected to innovation, but also about innovation as it applies to our daily lives. So I could be
Mm.
not in corporate or not connected to innovation and still find value and fun and use in this book. I think partially because I noticed how much I'm applying some of these principles to my family life as my kids get older and life gets more complicated. So that
Yeah.
was some of the genesis for that third book that's coming up. So that's been what I've been doing in a nutshell. And in terms of like how we met was generally because of my research and work in innovation. So the first body of work was really around this concept that you mentioned, Sahar, called Jugaad.
Yeah.
Jugaad innovation, as we call the book. So Jugaad is something I learned about while doing some ethnography in India, and I was going all around the country to think about, well, how do people solve problems even if they don't have a ton of traditional resources that we think about, like they don't have a lot of money, they may not even have formal education, sometimes they didn't even have infrastructure, but yet they're still solving pretty massive problems in everything from healthcare to access to affordable finance to education and so on. So it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, there was something there that was really powerful to look into. And so
Mm.
Jugaad, that kind of ingenuity, the frugality, the resourcefulness, the flexibility, the inclusiveness, right? We're not just solving problems for this teeny tiny layer of people. We're thinking about
Mm.
not only who we can solve the problems for, but who can help us solve the problems, right? So it's not just sort of the traditional players in the white lab code and R&D lab. Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that, but certainly there are lots of others who have value added insights and certainly can make some impact. So that's kind of how we met when we were thinking about, well, how do we do that in really large organizations and how do we create high value at lower cost? And then we together worked
Yeah.
on how do we apply emerging, at that time we would call emerging technologies like
Yes.
AI, AR, VR, blockchain to these projects and initiatives of large organizations. And even within those, thinking about how do we create higher value if we have limited resources, we have a smaller team, we don't have a huge budget, we have a really like all the sprints you used to run, so the abbreviated timelines that you have, how do we do that? So that kind of was body of work one. And as I started working with people like you, and I was teaching different organizations across sectors, mostly in the US, what, you know, whether it was healthcare, insurance, retail, manufacturing, and so on, how do we apply these principles? What I realized is while this idea of Jugaad and the ideation that came with it was really catching on, there were lots of barriers inside an organization that would stop people from being able to execute on their ideas. So then I wrote a second book and really dove into the research around intrapreneurship. So there again are people who act more like entrepreneurs inside of
Yeah.
big organizations. Who are they? what are the skills and characteristics that they have, and then kind of codified, well, how do they do it? Because in the end, we need some actionable insights, but how do we actually do that? And it's pretty, like a lot of things. I mean, we're talking about big organizations that are filled with people. People tend to be the same everywhere, right? And so change can be hard. Doing things differently can be hard. It's about how do we navigate that change and take our idea that might be an awesome idea and bring it forward through to execution. So those were the two big bodies of work that I had.
Amazing. And what's the name of the second book?
Disrupt it yourself. So
Disrupt It Yourself.
DIY, disrupt it yourself.
And then the
Because
third one.
the third one is TBD. It's a secret. I will reveal
Okay.
that.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool.
But it is focused on innovation in the sense that it's about what I like to talk about when I talk about innovation is how do we make things simpler and how do we make them easier and more accessible. So I'll say there are elements of that in the book.
Amazing. And you just mentioned as well R&D, and I think one of the challenges that I personally have when talking to companies, especially traditional companies, the ones that are very comfortable, they're making a lot of money, they're successful, they're doing really well, but they really think of innovation as R&D labs, inventions, or we've got 3D printers, and that's innovation. Can you please help me to define what innovation in simple terms for companies is?
And I think that's such a great question, Sahar, because I will agree with you that even in, our industry of innovation experts, sometimes there isn't a shared definition. And certainly within any organization, be it a large technology company or a manufacturing organization, there isn't always a shared definition, even within the organization itself, and even then within a division, and then within the business unit.
Yeah.
So my definition that I will share at the start of every session with organizations is it's the creation of new value. So
Yes.
I think everybody understands the new piece, right? So it's new, but it's also new value, and that value can show up in different ways. It may come out of the R&D
Mm.
lab. It may look like a product, but it might also be a service. It might also be a business model, right? The way we generate value and the way we generate revenue, for example, and things that people need to think about that I think bring more people into the conversation about, well, whose job is innovation, is adding new value can be things like, how do we save time? How do we make something more accessible? How do we reduce friction? And how do I, even things like process, how do I make this process simpler for an internal or external stakeholder? So my customer or my buddy down here who is like next in line after I get to work. That's something people can see themselves in. So certainly there can be more incremental or smaller scale innovations. There could be things that are applied from one industry to another, right? So that's still
Yeah.
new. So it's the addition of new value. Now, if I just complicate a little or add a little more detail, I would say for the masses, because invention could be, the prototype in my garage that I hacked together, and it definitely could add new value, but nobody's seen it yet. Still invention. It's got to be for a broader group for it to be innovation.
That's a great way to define it, I think. And what also comes to mind is that a lot of times they neglect the value of new business models. So it's not just, and when you said creating value, that's the first thing that came to mind, is that we want to create new business models, innovative business models. And I think a lot of your work also with Jugaad, which is also frugal innovation, is how can we create value with minimal resources? Yeah.
Let me share an example with you too, just so that it solidifies it in people's minds. So one of our clients was Stanley Black and Decker, and we may even have worked with them together on that project.
Not me,
But
no. Yeah.
we worked with
But
them for
I
a
know
long
common
time.
people that worked on that. Yeah.
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 So originally I was working with them independently, and we were working on how do we grow in emerging markets, finally in corporate, and we were looking at innovation, including accelerating technologies. One of the things we did for their emerging markets division was how do we move from products? So if we think of ourselves and other people think of us as we make widgets, we make tools, we wanted to move to business model innovation. And so what we did was look at a specific set of people. In this case, it was carpenters, electricians, and plumbers in India. And we thought about what are their needs. Now, the assumed need was they want cheaper tools. And I think we had to ask the question, well, how do we know that? There were some assumptions that were being made. And ultimately, after some ethnography, meaning some on the ground research, listening to what people say, observing how they work, right? Because it's not just what people say. It's, I also like to call it not just voice of the customer, but action of the customer. What are they doing? How can we make things easier for them? We realized that people didn't just want cheaper tools. They did want high value. Because in India, if you're a carpenter or an electrician or a plumber, you're more like a day laborer. You're not making $100 an hour like you might in the US. And it could be that if your tool breaks, you might not put food on the table. It's a really serious issue. Yeah. And so a lot of times also in big cities like Mumbai or New Delhi, in the middle of rush hour, it might take you 2 hours to get across the city. So if you have to go get something or you break your tool, it's not that you can just pick it up somewhere or get a new one right away. So we thought about the needs of wanting to save time, accessibility, education. People wanted, they wanted to learn how to build their businesses. There was a big legacy component that was super interesting. Like, what am I going to leave behind for my kids? How do I build a community so I can learn more from the community? It was fascinating. And so what we ultimately did is, based on those insights, we spun up 8 business models that were business models. It wasn't like they need a new planer for this wood. It was, we are going to deliver products and services in new ways with new business models. So one of them was a mobile tool repair van. So that was serving a whole bunch of different purposes. One was we could sell and repair tools. Great. The second is it was moving around. So it would go to a construction site. It would be in different parts of town. And so it created suddenly some accessibility for people. Then we built a community in it. So, and by the way, we did this with a van that was just sort of like an empty van, put some branding on it, tricked it out, put some repair, equipment inside of it. So we did equip it. And then we trained the person to not only sell the tools and repair, they already knew how to repair some of the tools, you find the right people, but also how to build community. So that person became kind of like what we called an ustad, like in music, sometimes you hear ustad means like a maestro, right? Like who can be the maestro that's going to tell us the way forward. And so it was really interesting how they built a community. And I think sometimes large corporations might say, well, great, so we'll start marketing and we'll do this, we'll do that. And it was like, well, you know what we can do? They were asking us in this context, what can we do that's a Jugaad innovation? Well, let's just start a WhatsApp channel. You can just have short videos on your WhatsApp channel from different users sharing like, hey, this is what I learned about how to use this tool. Or during this time of day, it's difficult to move from here to here. This is what I've done. Or I have a resource that's available to you. So all of a sudden, they went from making tools and selling those tools to a problem solver across the board, educator, creating mobility and accessibility, as well as generating revenue through these things. So it was a really win-win kind of model. And I think that thinking and that style, and it was so bare bones. It was like a shoestring budget, basically. We learned so much in just a few weeks. We had 13 metrics that we track every week, and how this works, right? In those sprints that you do. And we track them closely. We adjusted every week based on what we learned. And it wasn't that we turned the world upside down. We did it on a small scale before we expanded. So that's the power of thinking about Jugaad innovation and thinking about how do we add new value.
Amazing. I think one of the, as you were talking, I'm trying to figure out from your experience do you see that companies see value in creating value for others as well? Do they realize the potential for them to generate revenue, but at the same time also solving whether it's social or environmental problems? Like the example that you just gave, it could be, it's not just about, fixing the tools. It's about when you said putting food on the table, and that's a necessity for many, many people. And so do you think, from your observation working with companies, do you see that they're valuing this, or they're appreciating this kind of model?
I do think that companies appreciate it. I do think there are many companies who look at it, and I think the ones who are most successful are the ones who think in this fashion and who put purpose in their strategy. If you put purpose in your core business strategy, then I think you're more likely to achieve some purpose that is helping individuals at multiple levels. And I think if we think about, at the CEO roundtable that occurred, 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of the CEOs thinking about, well, who are our stakeholders? Our stakeholders are not just our shareholders. They have to be our employees. They have to be people in the community. It is the environment and so on. The problem, of course, is if you're a publicly held organization, you can often be at the mercy of analysts and quarterly earnings. And I think that tension is really hard to navigate. And I'm really grateful that I know a lot of leaders who are trying to navigate it every day. It's not easy though.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. And I think every region has its also differences in terms of, what works, what doesn't work, and, and how they think in general as well. What about we touched a little bit about the scarcity and the abundance models, and I really love this topic because sometimes when we talk to companies, they want to start solving a problem and then they go for a really small problem, and then like, what am I going to benefit from solving this really small problem? Like, why don't you think of really good problems to solve? And then when you add technology and you add elements of, exponentiality, like the community, as you mentioned, like you could solve really big problems and you can come up with a big solution. What's your take on, this scarcity versus abundance thing?
Well, what I know is that, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I think scarcity is the grandmother of innovation. I mean, so every frugal innovation and Jugaad innovation. So we see that time and time again. And I think part of the reason some of the best Jugaad innovation I've seen has been in healthcare is because the need is so dire that people are willing to think differently because lives are at stake, literally. So abundance is about, it's the mental reframe. So if we, I think I gave a TEDx talk a long time ago called Scarcity Reframed is Abundance, because I think the default is, I don't have budget, I don't have a team, I don't have this, I don't have the title. But the reality, and I think what I learned, this optimism from these Jugaad innovators, who sometimes very unfortunately are operating because they simply, it's survival. A lot of them though are operating just in an optimistic way that I think is relevant to all of us, which is, let me assess what I have. It's not what I don't have. I have knowledge. I have partners I could call on. I have some maybe bare minimum resources. I mean, what are all the things that I have? And that is the beauty. To me, that's almost like alchemy. It's so strange. When I first saw Jugaad in action and Jugaad innovation, I was like, what? How does that even work? It almost seemed magical, but it was partially it was that reframe of scarcity as abundance. And then, of course, you got to have a way to move forward as well, and have what I figured out is there's actually a process to do it. I think that it starts with mindset, and frankly, I think people in resource-rich environments are at risk of not learning that, and I think that is to their detriment. I think what I see is there's a massive resurgence and popularity of Jugaad innovation in the US right now, where I live, because everybody is saying, oh, I got to do more with less, more with less. And I literally have CFOs and others saying, hey, we got to do more with less. And I'm saying, I get it. And Jugaad innovation isn't about necessarily more with less, it's about doing better with less. And perhaps
Mm.
by doing less, being very intentional. What is the work we're doing? I hear a lot about efficiency right now. Efficiency is super
Mm.
important, but not till you know you're being effective. In other words, you can do things right all day long, but if you're not doing the right things in the first place, it doesn't really matter. So
Yeah.
first, let's make sure, are we solving the right problem? That's what I learned from the Jugaad innovators. They didn't have room to say, well, like, I'll just throw a budget at this, or we'll not really think about it and let people work on that. They had to get super focused. And often it was through empathy. It was like, well, they're often experiencing the problem or observing it in others. And that's how they would get laser focused on the problem. And they didn't. So, for example, if you're working in, trying to create a medical device, you're not worried about the bells and whistles of, it's like the software on your laptop, the 98% of software that you don't use. You're just thinking about the core need all the time. And when that's, to me, what I think is the abundance piece is we have a lot if we are brave enough to stay
Mm.
focused on what really matters most.
100%. And the problem of access is real. I think it's across the board. It's not just in emerging markets. Access to healthcare, access to education, and we're seeing like the startups. I think that are doing education through SMS messaging, for example. I really love those examples. Do you have any other examples they can share with us of how can we provide more access using with less, let's say?
Yeah, I think that technology is a huge enabler and a catalyst for Jugaad innovation. So SMS is a great example of that, right? So whether in years of education or years ago, farmers would use SMS to receive updates about weather or crops before they had smartphones and maybe
Yeah.
data access in certain regions. I think today, if we look at tools like generative AI, much of which
Mm.
can be free to get started with, I mean, we can really start to think about things like, predictive analytics, using existing historical data to make some predictions, or even like if we look at an example of the United Nations and we're looking at food insecurity, they will use AI to help to determine what weather patterns are, where
Mm.
is food where is there going to be a drought? Where are we going to have a food drought? Where do we need to first allocate resources because this region will be hardest hit? So I think those are ways that we can leverage technology to create simplicity, to create action, and it doesn't necessarily have to
Mm.
be expensive. And my hope is always that and this is why it's really important that we make sure that it does stay accessible, like tools like generative AI, that it doesn't have bias. Like we all have to be very alert about what biases exist. I think it will be a
Yes.
tremendous enabler of entrepreneurial activity for those who don't historically have as much entrepreneurial activity.
So you think it will open more doors for people to start creating their own businesses, solving problems?
I do. And I think it can be with, and as you know, because I know that you're also upskilling people like refugees and others who may not have even computer experience, forget about, more sophisticated technology. I mean, you could probably answer that question really well to say, yes, I think that if we help people understand technology, also understand it's not a sauce that you spread on everything, right? We
Yeah,
still have
yeah,
to understand
yeah,
what is the problem we're solving, get
yeah.
really crisp about our value proposition, get clear about solving the right problems. Then we can use the tools of technology and really accelerate or catalyze, the problem solving capabilities that we have. What do you think, Sahar?
Yeah. Well, I think, well, first of all, I'm just thinking about the refugee idea. It's not my initiative, but I was talking to someone that's working on that. She's the CEO of the startup that's helping the refugees to upskill using AI, and they found, as you said, like the very specific um, uh, area within AI that's needed for companies that they need to outsource. So they're not upskilling them in every aspect of AI. They're very specific, very focused to, to just emphasize what you just said. And then upskilling them on those areas and then outsourcing their services. So there's the match between the problem and the solution. And this is what I find fascinating about, creating purposeful initiatives, but also generating profit as well and becoming a profitable company.
100%. I used to work with MIT's D Lab for many years, and we worked with social innovators, and then we would think about, well, how do social innovators come together with NGOs and government organizations? How do we all play well together? And I think,
Yes.
sometimes I felt like we had to say very clearly, money isn't bad in those
Yes.
arenas. Sometimes it feels a little like maybe there's a little bit of a tension. And the thing is, if you're doing something like if you're training people so that they have access to global corporations where their skills are in demand and they can sort of elevate the lives of themselves and their families and beyond, that's pretty powerful. And so you can expand your mission through increasing that revenue, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's important for our social entrepreneur friends to remember.
Yeah, again, it depends on like what region and who you're talking to. Sometimes I feel like now we're at a tipping point where people are seeing that we can create purpose and profit. They can they can coexist together. But if we were talking about it, let's say 5 years ago, I don't think people saw that for the majority, right? Like I always think that in the US, for example, it's a little bit different. The startup ecosystem is more mature, innovation is more mature, and that's let's say generally speaking. But in other areas or in other regions, it's a little bit different. The concept of innovation is also new in terms of entrepreneurship within companies as well is also new. But now we're seeing like, and even the companies that don't care about purpose, you just go to their website and you see that a purpose statement, and then I'm like, okay, it doesn't really work like that, but okay, they're getting it like maybe some consultant told them, hey, you need a purpose statement. So, they have one in there. But those that really speak their, let's say walk the talk, they have the, they have the processes, they have the initiatives, and you can see that within the culture of the company.
Well, it's so interesting, and I agree with you about these regional differences. I think that purpose is still important for innovation. I think purpose is important for employees who want to be a part of something
Yes.
that matters. This is what I love also about Jugaad innovation and entrepreneurship. I often will very large organizations that have wonderful missions, like improving the healthcare of all women and or maternal child health, something wonderful that everybody can get behind. And then the people who work in the organization sometimes will say, I love the mission, but I don't feel that progress. I don't feel the purpose because I'm not really a part of it. And entrepreneurship oftentimes will make this very big thing small so that if they have an insight and they understand that insight, or there's a problem and unmet need that can advance the organizational mission and business goals and strategy, they can start working on that and feel purposeful themselves, which of course leads to better work, more productivity, higher level engagement, higher retention, all the things that everybody that organizations really want and need, especially from their best employees. So I do agree with you. I think purpose is coming to the fore. It can't be an empty promise. That's a tough one sometimes, but it is really important for innovation. It's important for growth. It's important for employee engagement. And it's important because it matters.
100%. Yeah. And also the new generation is changing things, changing the way, they're forcing it upon the companies as well. Yeah. I think we talked about a lot of things that I feel like are super super important. So before we end this, we spoke about scarcity and abundance. We spoke about, you know, innovation versus R&D and what it really means. Jugaad innovation, what it means, and like, you know, and I think that anyone that's listening to this, whether they are entrepreneurs or, you know, whether they are company CEOs, or, you know, whether it's someone that's interested in you know, being part of this as well, being part of an you know, an innovation initiative, I think it's super helpful, like, to listen to these tips that you've just mentioned. But what if I would ask you, like, for a final one or two tips that you would give, let's say, for someone that wants to start a purpose-driven initiative and is looking for a problem to solve, where should they start? What tips can you give them? Just one or two tips will be good.
Sure. Well, I always think the most important thing is to make sure you're solving, I don't want to say the right problem, but the best
Mm.
possible problem.
Um,
I also think that people can look to other organizations and partner. I think there's, you know, there's sometimes we have little
yeah.
entities that could partner and be really powerful together. But most importantly, are we solving the best possible problem? Have we validated that that's really a problem? So before you go, you know,
Mm.
that's sort of product market fit. That's sort of like fall in love
Yes.
with the problem, not the solution, all of those good things. I think the second thing I would share is making sure that you're really stay focused on that core need, adjusting as necessary. Of course, if you learn along the way that that's not the real, you know, problem, then
Mm.
adjust with it. But till then, stay focused on that. Don't get distracted by other things. And I think the final thing I would share is that you really have what you need already. While through your process, you will have to secure funding, you will ask others to
Mm.
partner with you, you will enroll other people so that you can grow. Don't be don't think that you need to always go outward. You have a lot to get started. You already have the resources you need to get started. And so look inward first and really take a
Mm.
clear assessment of what you have, knowledge, network, community, and so on, before you start looking outward.
Amazing. And I love that you said all three of them resonate so much. I think what's because I also work in the startup world, and usually these are not the tips that are given to startup founders, right? Go get the
Yeah.
investment, go. You know what I mean?
Eventually
Like it's a,
you have to do these things, but it's like it's sort of like the
yeah,
index. You got to index first before you decide what has the most impact. Then when you investigate, then you iterate and you kind of implement. So
100%. Yeah.
glad to hear something a little different.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Thank you so much, Simone. It was lovely talking to you after so long. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All the best
And
for
it's morning your time, I think. It's evening my time.
yes. It's
I
well, we're early afternoon here in Minneapolis, so
okay. All right, cool.
we got a little ways to go, but yeah. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Sahar.
Thanks a lot, Simone, and take care. Hope to connect again. Let's stay in touch, please.
Sounds good.
All right,
Thanks.
take care.